I'd like to give you Carl Jacobsen.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Nebraska, for, again, another warm welcome. I want to spend a few minutes tonight thinking about freedom. People always think about freedom, they talk about freedom. Freedom is a topic that people have wrestled with. They have different definitions of freedom. Freedom is the kind of thing that has made people take to the hills in their countries. Freedom is the kind of thing that has raised armies in the past. And everyone has a different definition of freedom. It's different for you, it's different for me. And one definition, there were several definitions of freedom that were put forward by a political philosopher in the late 17th century, British philosopher by the name of John Locke. John Locke is best known for one of his treatises that said that governments are created to preserve life, liberty, and property. Now we all remember that. Tom Jefferson paraphrased a little bit to call it the pursuit of happiness. He thought property was the pursuit of happiness. And he paraphrased that. So we're familiar with that part of John Locke's writing. But one of the other writings that John Locke wrote was about a feeling of captivity, the opposite side of freedom, imprisonment. And he likened it to a person who finds themselves in a room with the door closed and barred and locked from the outside, or so they think. But they are so convinced that that door is barred and locked that they never try the door. They live comfortably in that room, well-fed, well-clothed, comfortable enough in that very spacious room, but they never venture forth from that room because they really do believe there is no point in trying the door, because the door indeed is locked. So for the rest of their lives, they will spend that time in that room, and they are prisoners in an unlocked room. In 1940, just before the U.S. entry into World War II, Dr. Jacobsen and 17 people began what they called the National Federation of the Blind. That's an incredible amount of nerve to call something with 17 people the National Federation of the Blind. But they were dreamers. They had an idea of freedom. They had an idea of freedom for the blind, and they had specific definitions of what that freedom would be. And they started putting forth their word. But the word didn't reach everyone. The word didn't reach as far as it should have. The word spread, and it spread slowly through the 1940s and beyond. At the end of World War II, a soldier was discharged from World War II, a Norwegian immigrant who had served in World War II with Patton's army, and was discharged and returned to his home in Brooklyn, where he once again hooked up with a young Scottish girl who had immigrated to the United States in the late 1920s. They had been seeing each other before the war, and at that point decided that the war was over and time for them to marry and start a family. Well, they married. About a year later, a child came along. This couple expected a good life with a great kid, great children. Well, they got me. They got the best they could. It was after the war. Materials were short, and they got myself and my brother a few years later, and things were pretty normal through the late 40s and the 50s. With all the typical things of the Eisenhower generation, the Davy Crockett hats and the hula hoops and all this other stuff that only a few of us are left standing who remember. And things went on fine through those days. And somewhere in the early 60s, I started to notice that I wasn't seeing as well as I did in the past. That things were getting harder to focus on in school. I was in my junior year of high school, about 15. And things were getting harder to focus on. For instance, the word house on the blackboard was H-O-U and blur. So you switch your head to the other side, you have blur and S-E. And I brought this to my mom's attention, and she wasn't quite sure what to do. But we went off and we saw a few doctors. And by the way, I was getting notes from my mom saying I couldn't do my homework because I couldn't see. And some teachers thought that was a very creative excuse to not do your homework. You know, my reputation wasn't all that good at school at that point anyway. But After seeing a few doctors, they came to the conclusion that there was very little they could do, if anything, in those days. And the doctor said to my mother, and with me present, there is nothing we can do. You're going to go blind. In another month or two, you'll be more blind than you are now, and it will just go. And wasn't quite sure how to deal with that. And of course, my mom came home, had to tell my dad, and everybody kind of took it a little stoically for a while. And about a week or two later, I hear this sound from my folks' bedroom, and it's the sound of my dad crying. Everybody knows the sound of crying, and it's behind a closed door, but it was no mistaking. It was my parents' bedroom, and it was my dad. And he was just sobbing, and we knew why he was sobbing, because his son was going blind. It was despair. It was the end of what hopes could have been for them. And I paused to remind you that I told you that my dad was a Norwegian immigrant. How many of you are familiar with the Norwegian community? Yeah, the story goes so that there was this Norwegian fellow who loved his wife so much that in the heat of passion one evening, he almost told her. They are not wont to show emotion. So the sound of my dad showing emotion was something that really did strike home. It said to me, despair, end of anything, just go on and do whatever it takes to get from here to the end. So it was high school days, and I had to go to high school, and it was time to go back to high school after the doctors had said there's nothing they could do. I had to take a medical leave while they tested and rested and did all the other things to me. So I wind up back in high school, and in New York City at that time, the schools for the blind in high school were located in one high school in Brooklyn where they had a place that they called the Braille office. It was very easy to understand. What did they do there? They had Braille. They didn't call it a resource room. I don't know what a resource is. I knew what Braille was. And they had a teacher there who was called a Braille teacher. Hello. The job descriptions were not hard to understand. He was also our official teacher. He was also what we would today call the resource teacher, because it was his job to keep us on track. And all the blind kids in that high school would go to that room in the morning and then head out to your classes. Well, I get there the first day of the fall semester, and Mr. Ellis sits me down and says, okay, kid, you're going to fall behind. You've gone blind. You don't want to fall too far behind your schoolwork. You got 2 weeks to learn Braille. Let's get busy. He's out to teach you what you need to know in 2 weeks. The rest is up to you. Use it or lose it. He was a no-nonsense kind of teacher. A teacher that today would probably be brought up on charges. Like I said, we had about 5, 6, 7 of us in the classroom. And while you're waiting in the morning for your classes, the kids are just talking to each other. And you'll have that kid there doing the kind of things that the kids did in school that you didn't want to associate with. The kid's rocking. The kid's got his thumbs in his eyes, right to the back of his skull. You know? The kind of thing that he's, oh no, I can't deal with that blind kid. But meanwhile, Mr. Ellis wouldn't deal with that blind kid either. He'd say, Jimmy, stop rocking. You're making me sick to my stomach. Nobody wants to hire a blind kid that rocks. Nobody's going to look at that blind kid a second time. Quit rocking and take your fingers out of your eyes while you're at it. Now, teachers who talk like that are written up today. But that was the days. I think we began to call that something like tough love. But at the same time, we were taught the Braille and we were expected to do our thing. Now, in that class that day, or in those days, was a young lady. She was about my age. Her name was Linda. And Linda would come and go from school every day using a white cane. She'd get on the city buses and go her way. Now, kids are expected in New York City, high school students, typically sighted high school students, travel to and from school using mass transportation, the subways or the buses or whatever you would use to get to that location. We were on a school bus, the blind kids. Kids who ride school buses in New York City are usually in the 1st or 2nd grade. High school kids do not ride school buses. They go down on the trains with the commuters and get to their schools. I had spent 6 months on that school bus and was getting really tired of it. And I had seen Linda come and go from the class every day. And she was free. She was free to come and go on her own. She didn't have to wait for that bus. But one of the things, by the way, that Linda didn't do was talk about what she did. She just did it. She didn't say, I'm free, I'm going home, I'm free. She just picked up her coat and said, see everybody, see you tomorrow, and left. And she'd come in the morning and say, good morning, and we'd just go about the day. She didn't say, it's good to be free. She knew she was free, but she didn't share that with us. But she had a feeling inside herself that she was free. But none of us really understood that. So at some point, I said to myself, I want to do that again. I was riding these school buses, these subways and buses, before I went blind. I want to do that again. So I got my mom, and I said, I want to learn to travel with one of those white canes like I see Linda using. And she had the misgivings, of course, like all our moms did. Yeah, but you're going to get on the subway with that thing? I said, well, yeah, she does. You're going to go on the buses. You're going to go out the way. You're going to go 8 miles from home using that white stick? But I need somebody to show me how to use it, so where do I get one of those? So she called around to a few agencies, and the old industrial home for the blind, now Helen Keller Services for the Blind, had what they used to call back then a cane teacher. Again, not a hard job description, folks. Was a cane teacher, and his name was a fellow named Ed Towns. Was a cane teacher who showed up at my house one day, and he said, okay, here's a cane. And those days, they were huge canes. They came right up to your stomach, if you remember. But they were state of the art. I still have it, for old time's sake. I have it under the stairs at home. It's the old rain shine canes. The plastic handle is melted from the heat one time. I left it there in the summer, and it got really hot under the steps. And I didn't know a cane could melt, but it did. So he gave me this cane, and he said, okay, this is how we do it. And he'd walk up and down the streets with me, and he'd show me how to use the cane. And after a dozen or so times going on subways and buses and the like, he came one afternoon and he said, okay, here, last time I was at your house, I left some cleaning in the dry cleaners. I left my pants there. So here's a $5 bill and my cleaning receipt. I want you to go pick it up and bring it back here, and I'll be around nearby. But just go get them and bring them back here. I said, well, where's the cleaners? He said, oh, it's on the receipt. You're a wise guy, figure it out. I said, okay, this is before the KNFB Reader Mobile, by the way. This is before Kurzweil 1000. There's a piece of paper, and he told me it was a $5 bill fine, okay? And so I'm walking down the street now, trying to stop passersby. Excuse me, can you, excuse me. And they're passing me by. Finally got somebody to read the name of the place. Finally got somebody else to read the address of the place. Finally figured out where the place was based on the address and the name and everything. And went to the dry cleaners, got the pants, and left the store. And I swore I was going to drop them in the street. He's not doing that to me. Where's the puddle? I'm searching around for a puddle with my cane. There's got to be a puddle here to drop this thing in somewhere. But I didn't. I brought them back to him, and I gave him back his money, his change, and his pants. And actually, Mr. Towns tells that story every once in a while. Some of you were in Dallas in '06. The Honorable Ed Towns from the 10th Congressional District, who introduced our quiet bill, was the fellow who did that to me. Like Dr. Mauer said, sometimes you really do find people who know about cane travel. Actually, Mr. Towns' remark at that time, he says, now the people who do what I do are called orientation and mobility instructors. The pay went up, so the name got longer. But the thing that Mr. Towns nor Mr. Ellis would tell me was about the freedom I could experience as a blind person. They were making my room comfortable. I was now able to navigate my room. I was able to read in my room. I was literate. I was becoming educated. And I was able to travel around a great big room, but I was still locked in my room. I was still a prisoner in my own self, in that room that John Locke described, because no one had told me that the door was unlocked. No one was giving me that freedom to leave. So some time goes by now, and I head off to college. And in the middle of college, prior to going to college, I had been seeing this young woman in New York. my late wife was going to nursing school at the time, and I headed out to Minnesota to college. And somewhere in the middle of college, I did what most of us did in the 60s. He said, enough of this stuff, let's get married. Education can wait. I can finish education anytime, which I did, by the way. But we got married, and we got our first apartment. And do you remember your first apartment? Oh my God, you want to go back there? That was one of those places that had year-round ventilation, winter and summer. It had running water under the windowsills. It had visitors that came under the doorway, as well as through the door. Bugs, as well as your landlord, came uninvited. And sometime after we were living there for a while, we found out that Sally was pregnant, and we were going to have our first child. And we decided that really isn't a place for us to live. Forget about a new baby. So let's go looking for an apartment. So we went out and we found an apartment, and we put a down payment on the apartment. And everything's going fine. It's a great place. No bugs. Nice landlord. All the appropriate things. And one afternoon, I get a call from Sally. I was working the night shift at that time in the Randolph Shepherd program in New York City at a 24-hour facility, a post office. And she was working the day shift at a hospital. And I got a call from her saying, I just got a call from the real estate agent, and they tell me we can't have the apartment. I said, why? What happened? They said, we can't have it because you're blind. Now it was a very simple statement. Nobody questioned that in those days, because this is prior to those laws that we take for granted today. Prior to anti-discrimination laws, they said you can't have it because you're blind. 10, 20 years prior to that, they could say you can't have it because you're black. Well, things were changing in the 60s for certain groups. They continued to change through time. But still, in 1968, you couldn't have it because you're blind was an acceptable rejection. Well, I didn't quite think it was an acceptable rejection. And I called my boss. My boss was a fellow named Norman Decker, and I was supposed to come in to work that evening. And he was there, and he was waiting to go home. And I called up Norman, and I said, Norman, I'm having a problem with an apartment. They tell me I can't have it because I'm blind. I have to figure out what to do. Now, I paused to say, I paused to ask you, first of all, how many of you remember the show All in the Family? Yeah. How many of you remember the character of Archie Bunker? Yeah. You thought Archie Bunker was fictitious, didn't you? I worked for Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker was my boss. Norman sounded like Archie Bunker. He thought like Archie Bunker. He acted like Archie Bunker. He was the incarnation of Archie Bunker. So I called him up and I said, Norman, we can't have this apartment because I'm blind. He said, no. What are you telling me, kid? He said, look, there ain't nothing you can do, kid. You just come into work here, and I'm going to take care of this for you, okay? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, look, don't butt me nothing. Just come into work, and we'll see what we can do about this stuff. I said, well, okay, I didn't have any better ideas. So I came to work, showed up, and took off my coat, hung it up, and said, okay, it's time to get to work. He says, okay, now, tell me the name of this bum or won't give you the apartment. So I did, and what's his phone number? So I tell him the phone number of the real estate agency. He says, okay, go to work. Call you later. Norman leaves. Time goes by. I started at 3 o'clock, 4, 5 o'clock comes. About 5:30 or so, the phone rings. And I answer it, and he says, kid, you just got the apartment. You and the missus. You just got the place. I said, I got what? He said, I told you, you just got the apartment. Don't worry about it. I said, what'd you do? He said, never mind what I done. He said, we just took care of it for you. I said, come on, Norman, tell me what you did. He said, all right, look, you really want to know, I'll tell you. I calls up this real estate joke, and I says to him, how'd you like to have 20, 30 blind guys picking in your real estate agency with canes and dogs? Later on, we began to call something like that collective action. But in those days, it was just known as straight-on delivery.
I came to understand later that the reason Norman could pull that off, because he was a member of an organization called the Empire State Association of the Blind. Now, the Empire State Association of the Blind was formed by Norman, who was a charter member, and quite a few other people who I came to know later. They changed their name in 1973 to the National Federation of the Blind of New York. But I didn't know that. He didn't tell me that. He just solved the problem for me, like we do for so many others. He saw a problem and he solved it. And never bothered to share with me that my door was unlocked. He got me a nicer room with better furnishing and no bugs. But it didn't tell me anything about my freedom. Didn't tell me anything about the door being free, about my ability to be free in myself. But Norman, along with his colleagues in the Federation, took care of a kid's problem. So this kid eventually moved on. We'll fast forward there, a couple of different careers, a couple of different management positions, a couple of kids later. We now have a home. Like with 2 cats in the yard, life just seemed to be so hard. Exactly. We'll do that song later. And one day we moved on. Now my kids are teenagers. Our kids are teenagers, and I get a call on the phone from a fella named Rabby. And, yeah, I remember him. And this fella, and on the other end of this phone is this very proper gentleman saying to me, "I've heard about you, and I'm thinking you've got something to offer." I said, "Yeah," and I'm thinking telemarketer here, yeah. He said, I think perhaps you might want to take a trip to Baltimore and see Kenneth Jernigan. I said, "What's a Kenneth Jernigan?" He said, "Well, he's with the National Federation of the Blind in Baltimore, and perhaps he could tell you something about blindness." I said, "Come on, what's he going to tell me about blindness?" No, well, number one, I've been blind for 20 years. What's this Jernigan guy going to tell me? "Well, I think he could probably illuminate things for you a bit." He said, yeah, sure, right. Leave me alone. I got the house, got the kids, got the job. Leave me alone. And there's nothing this Jernigan guy is going to tell me about anything. He said, "Well, perhaps if you won't go to Baltimore, could I send you some materials?" Now, how many of you have said yes to a telemarketer to just get him off the phone? It's free, I'll take it, fine, sure, whatever. So I said, "Yeah, sure, send me whatever you want." I'm figuring there's going to be, a couple of pages of information show up. This thing that's, almost the size of a refrigerator box shows up on my porch one day. And it's full of things called Braille monitors, and full of speeches, and full of things called left-handed dissertation, handicapper characteristic, things all about this NAC outfit, and things about white canes, and things about Braille, and things about an organization that I didn't have a clue about. But I did promise him I would read some of it. So I did, and I read some of it, and I said, some of this makes a little bit of sense here. Maybe this Jernigan guy isn't as crazy as I told Remy he was. Then let's read a little more. So I read a little more and said, this is making some sense. There's something to this. I'd like to find out a little bit more. It's starting to hit a chord. And I found out there was something was going to be held called a state convention. What's a state convention? I don't know. But let's go find out what a state convention is. So I found out it was going to be in a place called Binghamton, New York. I'm not sure if you guys know New York geography. I don't know Nebraska geography that well. But there is a place here in Nebraska that in order to get there, you have to be born there. Binghamton is very much like that. It's got a bus in and a bus out. And I don't know why the president of that affiliate picked Binghamton, but he picked Binghamton. So it had a bus in and a bus out. And I said to my wife, want to go there? Well, what the heck, we'll go there. So it took a ride, and a ride, and a ride, and a ride. You know about driving halfway across the world to get somewhere? Well, we did. And we arrived in Binghamton at about 10 o'clock in the evening. The streets are already on the hinges. They've already been rolled up. And there's one cab in town. We're waiting for it to come to the bus station. And there are a couple of other people who are apparently going to that convention. 2 other blind people got off the bus with us. and they're waiting there at the bus station, and they start talking to us. You going to the convention? Oh, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? Who do you are? Who are you? And I'm thinking to myself, this is weird. Now, how many of you remember the 1998 Dallas convention? It was Dr. Jernigan's last. And at one point he took the podium and he said to all of us assembled, I just ran into this gentleman in the hall who came up to me and said, hi, I want to shake your hand before you die. Yeah. And all around the convention floor, every state president said to themselves, I know who that is. Because we said, who? Dr. Jernigan said, no, I'm not going to tell you. I'll take that with me. But we all, in every affiliate, had at least 3 suspects. Now, when I tell you somebody said that, you can think of 3 people in Nebraska who might have said that. You don't have to name them here, but there are people going on in your head right now that could have been. I still don't know to this day, and I'm not sure Mrs. Jernigan remembers, so I probably wouldn't even ask her. But I had my 3 suspects. So there were 156 suspects at the convention who could have said that to Dr. Jernigan. Well, those are the people that I met. That was my first exposure to the membership. Those people were the people that I met at my first New York convention. Now, fortunately, when we got there, I met a few other people. And they were discussing resolutions, and they were discussing constitutions, and they were picking on the guy from the agency. It was a different time then. Things have gotten a lot better. But they were lambasting this guy. They were throwing rocks, you know. And it was just a general brawl. And I said, oh, so I'm going to come here to fight? Is that what I'm doing? I said, well, let's stay. We're here for the weekend. And came that Saturday evening, there was the banquet address. And there was somebody there that they referred to as a national representative, whatever that was. I'm still not sure what that is today. But there was a national representative there. And as part of the banquet address, she spoke about a time when she was going blind. And spoke about a time when she heard her father cry, which was unusual for her father too. Shared that story. And I said, wait a minute, that's my story. She's talking about me. She's talking about the despair that she was raised with. She was talking about the despair that her father felt and translated to her. She was talking about a hopelessness that she felt until she met the National Federation of the Blind and shared at that banquet speech the message of freedom, the internal freedom that comes from knowing who you are as a person. She shared that with the audience, but she was talking to me. Everybody else was listening, but I know I was getting the message. It was a message of hope that came from her experience and the shared experience of thousands and thousands of blind people that we shared one by one. And I talked to her afterwards, and we shared some of the more in-depth philosophy and the attitudes and the beliefs and just the camaraderie and just the kind of sharing that we do with each other. And all of a sudden, that door was open. The door was open, and I knew I could leave that comfortable room and go on because I was no longer a captive in myself. Forget the material possessions. There was no longer a mental, and a spiritual, emotional captivity because she shared her story of her journey out of blindness and into freedom with me, one-on-one. I took the opportunity from that state convention, and as like Paul Harvey might say, now you know the rest of the story. But it's been a growing experience, and we still find ourselves occasionally trapped in that room. But it is our obligation as members of this organization, our obligation as officers in this organization, to show the person who's still in that room, and you might be in that room yourself tonight, that the door is unlocked. The door, you can open the door, all you need to do is walk through, and there's a person on the other side of it with their hand out, willing to show you the way to freedom. The freedom is on the other side of that unlocked door, and you can be found through the National Federation of the Blind. So share it with your friends, everybody. Share it with people you meet. It's a one-on-one process. It's not a thing we can do in resolution. It's a thing that we will pass on to each other, and one day we will take everyone through that door to freedom. Thank you very much.